Hi everybody. In this video I want to talk about the rule different symbols subtract and take the symbol in front of the larger number. So first of all, what do I mean by different symbols? I'm referring to these symbols over here. So you can use this rule if you're working out a problem where you have a negative over here, but you have a plus symbol over here. So you have different symbols in the problem. All right, now let's go ahead and just work out this problem like we normally do. So the other rules that we've been talking about were to start at the first number, and then the operation tells you which direction to move, and then the second number tells you how many spaces to move. So we would start at -6 and then move to the right 10 spaces. So you can see I already did that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So our answer to this problem, -6 plus 10, is 4, +4. All right, now that's old information for all of you. What I want to talk about in this video is another way of looking at this problem. So let me go ahead and get my arrows over here. I hid them behind that little rectangle. Here they are. So I'm going to take this arrow, which is 6 units long, and I'm going to place the tail of the arrow over here at 0, so that the tail lines up with 0. So the rules that we've been talking about say that we should start at the first number, but now I'm just looking at it a different way. I can say that I'm starting at 0 and then moving 6 spaces to the left, and that would bring me to -6. So it's basically the same thing. And then for this +10 over here, I will take a second arrow, and I'm going to put the tail of this arrow to match up with the head of the first arrow. So that's telling me that from -6, I should then move 10 spaces to the right. And then over here, I have what I call an answer arrow. So I'm going to place the tail of the answer arrow at 0, and then I'm going to extend it. I already extended it, but I could say it this way. I'm going to make sure that I extend the answer arrow so that the head of it matches up with the head of that second arrow that I put down. All right, and you can see, or actually, the question now becomes, what is the length of this answer arrow? Now, wait a minute. Before you answer, I want you to pretend that we didn't have all of this other stuff here. Okay, so we're going to figure out the length of that answer arrow just by looking at this picture over here made up from these 3 arrows. Now, if you just look at those arrows, how can you figure out how long the answer arrow is? Well, if you think about it for a little while, you can pause the video if you want, and then come back. All right, and now I'll tell you. The way you can figure that out is you can take this long arrow here, which was 10, and if you subtract this shorter arrow, which was 6, that will tell you the length of the answer arrow. So what I'm going to do over here is I'm going to write the word work. So this is the work that we're going to do to figure out the length of that answer arrow. We're going to take the longer arrow and subtract the shorter arrow. Okay, and 10 minus 6 is 4. So that tells us that the length of the answer arrow is 4. All right. Now I want you to be careful though, because this work is not the end of the problem. So this tells me that the length of the answer arrow is 4, so that much is true. But then I have to think to myself, is it a +4 or is it a -4? Or in other words, if I do -6 plus 10, then on the number line, would I arrive at +4 or -4? Because this work right over here, it only tells me how long that answer arrow is. It doesn't tell me if it's moving to the right or to the left, okay? So in order to see that, I would have to look back at the picture, and I can see that this answer arrow is pointing to the right, because so that tells me that the answer to the problem, okay, and when I write answer here, I'm not simply referring to the length of the arrow. I mean, where would I end up on the number line, at +4 or -4? The answer to that is I would end up at +4, okay? So now that we did that work, let's look back at this rule, and hopefully this rule makes a little bit more sense now. So the rule says if you have different symbols, like we do over here, then you should subtract, okay? That's the work that we did right over here. And remember, why did we subtract? We subtracted because based on this picture over here, that was the way that we could figure out the length of the answer arrow, by subtracting this smaller arrow from this longer arrow. Okay, and then the second part of the rule says, which we already did, take the symbol in front of the larger number. So I didn't write it explicitly. Let me just go ahead and, you know what? Let me wait a second before. Ooh, that's not what I wanted to do. Let me wait a second before I write it over here. So let's take the symbol in front of the larger number. So going back to our problem over here, we had the number 6 and the number 10. So I want you to ignore these symbols just for a moment and just focus on the 6 and the 10, okay? Which is bigger? Well, the answer is 10 is bigger than 6, right? So this rule says I'm going to take the symbol in front of the larger number. So now let me erase this and remind myself, what was the symbol in front of the larger number? Okay, it was that plus symbol there, right? So that means that my answer to the problem is going to be +4. So when we write numbers, we don't always write the positive symbol there, but I'm just writing it to make it explicit now. So the answer was +4. And again, it makes sense from looking at this picture over here, because we went further to the right than we did to the left, didn't we? We only went 6 spaces to the left, but we went 10 spaces to the right. So it makes sense that our answer ended up in positive territory. So that's why we got this positive answer here. Okay? Now, I know that took me a long time to explain, and you're probably thinking to yourself, Mr. Friedman, it was so simple just to start on the number line at -6 and then move 10 spaces to the right, okay? And that got us the answer easily. We all saw from the number line that it was +4. Why did you even bother telling us about all of this just to get the same answer? It seemed easier the other way. Well, the reason I'm doing this is because, yes, it's when the numbers are relatively small, it's pretty easy to just work it out on a number line and count however many spaces you need to count. However, when the numbers get bigger, so for example, if you had the problem -88 plus 59, yes, you could work out the answer by starting at -88 and then moving 59 spaces to the right, but that would take you a really long time, wouldn't it? And you don't want to be doing all of these problems that way. So when the numbers are larger, then this rule over here actually turns out to be an easier way of finding the solution to the problem. So let's do this other example here. And we're not going to count this time. We're going to use this rule. So what does the rule say? It says if we have different symbols. Well, do we have different symbols? Yes, we do. We have the negative symbol over here, and we have that plus symbol over here. So they are different, right? So according to this rule, the work that I'm going to do is subtraction. So I'm going to take 88 and I'm going to subtract 59. Now this is very important. Notice that even though there was a negative in front of the 88, I did not put the negative in front of the 88 over here. Whenever we're doing the work, then the bigger number always goes on top, okay? And the smaller number always goes below it. And it doesn't matter if the negative sign was in front of this number over here. When I do my subtraction, I have to put the bigger number on top and I have to subtract the smaller number. Always, 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 okay? So let's see here. Let's do 88 minus 59. So I can't take 9 away from 8. So I need to borrow from this 8, which would then become a 7, and put in a 1 in front of this 8, which now makes it an 18. So then 18 minus 9 is 9, and 7 minus 5 is 2. So I get 29, all right? Now, is 29 my final answer? Okay, so no, 29 is actually not my final answer. And let's look at this picture over here. And this time I kept the number line in the positive territory and the negative territory, so we can take a look at that also. What does this 29 tell us? It simply tells us the length of this arrow. It doesn't tell us anything about whether the arrow is pointing to the left or pointing to the right. It only tells us that the arrow is 29 units long. We still have to think a little bit about which direction that arrow is pointing in. Okay, so, well, you can just see it from the picture here that it's pointing to the left, but it also makes sense to think that, well, if I started from 0 and then I moved 88 spaces to the left, but then I only moved 59 spaces to the right, I would still end up in negative territory, right? So I still moved further to the left than I did to the right. So that's why my answer arrow is still pointing to the left, which tells me that if I do all of this, I'm going to end up not at positive 29, but at negative 29. So this is really what I'm looking for. So that's what I'm going to write my final answer as, negative 29. Okay? And another way that we could have seen that just from this rule, take the symbol in front of the larger number. Again, going back to here, I'm just going to draw over these for a second. So I want you to just ignore those for a second and just focus on the numbers 88 and 59. Which one is larger? Well, 88 is larger than 59, right? So this rule says, after we do our subtraction, which we did over here, we're going to take the symbol in front of the larger number. So 88 is larger. And let's just remind ourselves now, what was the symbol in front of it? Ah, yes, it was that negative symbol, right? So that's why, following this rule, you could also figure out that the answer will be a negative, not a positive, because we moved over here. You can see we moved further to the left than we did to the right. Okay, so I hope that makes sense. It's a lot of information to take in. One last thing that I'm just going to say is, please, whenever you're using this rule, don't forget this last part, because students always forget the last part. You have to take the symbol in front of the larger number, and sometimes you're going to get a positive result, like we did back over here when we moved further to the right. And sometimes you're going to get a negative result, like over here when we moved further to the left. Okay? All right. So that's it. Have a great day.